Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by OnlineGreatBooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas. I'm Scott Hambrick.
And I'm Karl Shute.
Today on the Online Great Books podcast, we are going to discuss George Orwell's novel, 1984.
Oh, I thought we were going to do Van Halen's album, 1984.
I would much rather.
Which came out in 1984.
It did. I first learned about that book, 1984, on New Year's Day of 1984. I was 10 years old, and I was listening to KRMG 740 AM radio, the morning show, and John Erling, the morning show host, ran down how he thought we were similar and dissimilar from George Orwell's predictions of what 1984 might be like. And I thought, I'll read that book. And I read it later that year, and then I've read it again later, probably when I was 16 or 17, and I don't think I had touched it since then. This is a bummer because this morning we recorded a music and ideas podcast you and I did with Michelle Hawkins. Mm-hmm. Go listen to that, guys. And we did it about Toto. And Toto, the band, being a big part, instrumental part of the production of the Thriller album. We ended up talking about Michael Jackson. And all that was a hell of a lot more fun than this.
Well, yeah, gosh, it's a hard book. It is a prediction of a future where there is complete control of everything, but most importantly, of the ideas, of the literature, of the poetry, of the music, of the pornography that the proles consume that they think is forbidden but isn't really. You know, it's actually produced in a lab by bureaucrats. It's depressing because of the degree to which it rings true. So there are these two 20th century dystopian novels that I think are probably the biggest ones. It's this one and then Brave New World.
Yeah.
People will say we've ended up with Brave New World. I think we ended up kind of with both. We'll talk about that. I have to try really hard not to get down a dark rabbit hole and name names and get my tinfoil hat on. And I'm going to try to be good for this episode.
No, I don't want good Karl. Good Karl's boring. I had read Brave New World since I had read 1984 last. I read Brave New World in the last 5, 6, 7 years for the first time. Aldous Huxley's novel, Brave New World. And so before I read this, I was like, Huxley called it better than Orwell. But having read Orwell, again, they both got it 100% right. And it's worse than either of them could have imagined. From the story I've read, and it's been a long time since I read this, was that Huxley and Orwell were acquaintances. Somehow, Huxley wrote his book earlier, and Orwell thought he had some of it wrong. And I believe that this was actually consciously a response to Brave New World. I could be wrong about that. But whether Orwell wrote it that way or not, for all the rest of us, it is.
For Brave New World, the provocative idea for me, well, other than that there was a reservation of old-fashioned folks that the guy drops into. I thought that was kind of...
Yeah, that's where I want to be.
Yeah, I'm heading there. Was Soma, the drug. So everybody takes a drug to give happiness because they don't have any idea of what real happiness is. And so take your pill.
You know, there's a sleep aid where the patented brand name is Soma.
I'm not taking it.
Why not?
You know, I had this conversation with a guy at the gym because recently in the state of Illinois, we have legalized marijuana.
Mm-hmm. I made a mistake. It is not a sleep aid. It's a muscle relaxer, it looks like.
Okay. And, you know, I have never partooken of marijuana. I have never partaken. I've smelled it. Smelled like burning garbage. Didn't want to do it. Now it's legal. Are you going to do it? No. Well, why not? Because I want to perceive reality. And then the guy said, well, but reality sucks. And I'm like, Yeah, I want to perceive it. And furthermore, why do you think it's being pushed to be legal?
It's soporific.
Yeah, so that you take soma and they can oppress you or do whatever and you won't notice. You will be a compliant populace. I don't want to be compliant. If it's bad, I want to know it's bad. I would rather be unhappy in an unhappy situation. It's like Walker Percy talks about. If 51% of the people are depressed, maybe it's not a sickness.
Right.
Maybe it's the proper response to a depressing situation. So I would much rather be able to think clearly than to take a drug which makes me think everything is great. But, for soma, there are actual drugs that like 1/5 of boys in America are on some kind of drug. I think Netflix and chill is kind of the same thing.
Yeah, the underlying theme, I think, in Brave New World is that people wanted to check out, and maybe that they wanted to check out and be anesthetized, and that the government wanted them to be as well.
Right.
So there's soma, and there's also like this hyped up weird sex stuff that goes on in Brave New World, and all of it's about giving the people lots of places to escape, lots of places and ways to escape. And since everybody's all checked out with all their weird sex stuff and all their weird drug stuff, the government could do whatever the heck they wanted then. This is different. 1984 is a neo-puritanical, entirely oppressive, authoritarian state that wants to control everything and cares not if you have an escape. There's something much more humane about Brave New World.
Mm-hmm. 1984 works to get rid of it. The first line I have highlighted in here, it's got a good first sentence. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13.
It's a good one.
That's a good first sentence. But the thing I have highlighted is the instrument, the telescreen, it was called, could be dimmed, but there was no way of shutting it off completely.
Siri, what's a telescreen? Alexa, what's a telescreen?
It's the thing that's always on that you can't quite turn off.
Does it listen to you?
Yes, it does.
Huh.
But of course, the terms and conditions, it will never be used against you.
Trust me.
Would I lie? So it's perpetual surveillance. You're always being tracked. We are recording this during the great pause in 2020. And I saw a little while back, this is where we're doing this social distancing thing, that people were able to track which states were social distancing better than other states.
Right.
And the way they did it was with Android location data on your phone.
They're keeping you safe.
Yeah.
They know how to keep you safe.
Yeah, these are some things that 1984 there's a trend to more and more surveillance. If a government entity that, after all, knows what is best, that's what governments are for, if they can surveil you, why wouldn't they? What is the motive not to?
The flip of that is one of the themes of this book. It's like, what is the state's motivation to do the things the state does? And at the end of the book, we get a little glimpse why they may do that. We're not sure, but maybe.
Yeah. Should we hold off on that?
Yeah, I think we should. But that's the thing. You're like, well, why wouldn't they surveil you? Well, why did they do it anyway? Why did they do it in the first place? What's behind the totalitarian impulse?
Yeah. So we mentioned Brave New World, and the reason why I'm not going to partake of course, the friend in the gym says, well, what about bourbon? It's not mind-altering. But okay, fine. If I had to, I'd give it up rather than be a doped-up slave. You know? What is happiness? Is happiness being drugged? Is happiness merely an emotional state? I don't think it is. I am Aristotelian in this.
Mm-hmm.
It took me a while to figure this out. It was Thomas Aquinas who taught me what Aristotle really meant. Well, it's just easier in Thomas to read.
Yep.
Thomas is a real good interpreter of Aristotle. It's worth picking up his commentaries. I think St. Augustine Press in South Bend publishes some of them.
He's a great teacher.
But he says, just really clearly, happiness is an activity. which Aristotle said too. I just didn't get it the first few times I read the Nick and Kate Ethics. Happiness is not an emotional state. Happiness is a deed. It's an action. It's a state of continually doing certain kinds of actions. Happiness is not sleeping. You're not happy when you're asleep. You're not happy when you're drugged. You're just not. Stop saying it. It's not happiness. It's being prepared for surgery. It's not happiness. Happiness is doing stuff. Happiness is, talking to your friends about things that matter. It's enjoying your children. It's action.
Action. And behind the action, there has to be agency. You have to be able to make the choice, know you're making the choice, and then do the thing, I think. And agency has been removed from the people in 1984. In Brave New World, they're numb. And it's removed because they're numb. But they're not numb. Well, some of them are. But some people are awake in the world of in Oceania at Airstrip 1. And their agency is all gone. So they can't be happy. And everything is designed to be life disaffirming. The telescreen never goes off. It plays this weird patriotic music that was written by machines. Right on page 2, he says, inside the flat, a fruity voice was reading out a list of figures which had something to do with the production of pig iron. Everything is about economics. Everything is about war. The art, it's artificial and generated by the state, and it too is about war, about patriotism, about economics. Even the art in the movies are.
Oh, yeah. The girl in the book, what's her name? Julia?
Julia.
The girl in the book works in the production of novels. So you think she's a writer? No.
Mechanic.
She's a mechanic.
It's a weird kind of steampunk world where these kaleidoscopic machines serve to write up these novels and these songs and stuff. It's so weird. Everything in their lives is created to really break their reason, their rationality. Winston is the protagonist, the main character in the book. He knows something's wrong. Like, he tries to think about certain things, but he doesn't even have the furniture to think about them. He says that he doesn't understand how to communicate with the future. He doesn't know what the past is. He says either the future would resemble the present, in which case it would not listen to him, or it would be different from it, and his predicament would be meaningless. Like, he starts to keep a journal, and he doesn't even know why. So on the face of that story where he starts to keep the journal, which is illegal, by the way, you think, well, he's not really sure what he wants to do with it, but he's just being expressive, and people journal and stuff. But under that is he wants to communicate something about what today is like in a format that's not controlled by the state, so somebody in the future could see what things were. Because Winston works in the Ministry of Information. What's it called? Is that what it's called?
Ministry of Truth.
Ministry of Truth. And his job is to get articles out of the old newspapers and rewrite them so that it all looks like every prediction that Big Brother ever made, everything they've ever done has been right. If somebody gets disappeared because they were a political dissident, they disappear them from everything that's written. And there are legions of people that just rewrite all the books, all the periodicals, everything, so that Big Brother looks like it has never aired. So he's really confused about what time is and about what truth is. He doesn't understand it. So he's writing this journal and he doesn't even know why.
It's not against the law to write a diary.
Right.
This was not illegal. Nothing was illegal since there were no longer any laws. But if detected, it was reasonably certain that it would be punished by death or at least by 25 years in a forced labor camp. 25, that should be familiar to you from the Gulag.
And this book's pre-Gulag.
Yeah, so it's like an instruction manual. It's the problem when you write dystopian fiction. There are readers who are going to take it and do it. Like, I wasn't writing an instruction manual. It was a warning. How can you communicate with the future? There's a line later in the book, he who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the past controls the future. If you think about the past, it doesn't really exist. Or rather, you have to think a little bit metaphysically. In what way does the past exist? It exists in memory. Okay, well then it only exists How many years have passed do we have? Who's the oldest human with a good memory? Maybe 105?
Right.
So 105 years of past still exist right now. So we talked about Thomas Aquinas, who lived to 1275. I guess he doesn't exist. Well, no, he exists because there's written books. So I can go dig up. I have written copies I liberated from some libraries, since libraries don't have books anymore. Some of them in Latin. And you can get it digitally for now, of Thomas Aquinas, and I can read what this guy wrote 800 years ago. And so it has existence that way.
It has existence that way. The past is still about memory, and I think that the written word is an aid to memory. Your computer has a disk drive in it. People have books.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like that. But for Winston, he says, all history was a palimpsest, scraped clean and reinscribed exactly as often as was necessary. So he didn't trust written records at all. That was his job, was to obscure written records. And in his world, this kind of weird steampunk Airstrip One world that he lives in, he actually would have to look at an old copy of the London Times, retype the article, reprint it, and then destroy all the old copies.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of work.
And where would you destroy them?
You'd put them in the memory hole.
In the memory hole, which is a phrase that has gotten into regular English, to put stuff in the memory hole.
And this is why I hate digital books. They're not immutable enough.
Well, and you don't own them, and they're not immutable enough. They ought to be published on a blockchain or something where they can't be changed.
There's your project, listeners.
Blockchain library?
You betcha.
Go do it, dear listener. Somebody will do it.
You should get the books that are important to you in paper and keep them on you. They don't really, I don't think they say this in the book, but for Winston to do what he does and destroy all this previous writing and then reproduce it, the only way that would work is if at some point they had rounded up all the printed materials.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, digital books, you have to be careful. Even with digital books, some of the people from whom you buy them, Jeff Bezos, if you read, you don't really own it.
No.
You have a license to look at it. And so if, and this has happened, if Amazon decides that certain books are inconvenient or shouldn't be owned, they will wipe them from your Kindle. This has happened.
Yeah.
Books that you think you have paid for. Well, you didn't. You didn't pay for the book. You paid for a license from Jeff to look at it on the handy little device. Yeah, and I've got a bunch of them too. So they are handy little devices. But you just got to know you don't own it. You might want to own the things that, if a book becomes inconvenient, then it goes away. It gets disappeared. It puts down the memory hole. You say, I remember reading that. Well, what did you read it in? Oh, in this book written by so-and-so. Well, I can't find that book.
If a book contains bad think, it will get memory hold.
Bad think. Yeah, so this is, there is this new language that they're making. What's the name of the language?
Newspeak. It's either New Speak or News Peak.
Newspeak. We get to meet one of the people behind it. The goal of it is to make wrong think impossible.
Really, to make anything impossible. Every new Newspeak dictionary is smaller than the last one. They're compressing the language. Like, we don't need a word for bad. We could just say ungood.
Mm-hmm. Double plus ungood.
Double plus ungood is really, really bad. That's what they do. And its design is, one, to prevent wrong think, thought crimes. And the other one is just to prevent people from having the tools for cognition they would need to rebel, have self-actualization, to be rational, etc. Because if you remove the vocabulary for, conceptual thought from people, they have to reinvent it. It was hard for us to get.
And I don't think you could do poetry in Newspeak.
Oh,
Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more plus good and double plus good?
It'd be like the prosthetic Vogon Jelts. Poetry.
Vogon poetry.
Yeah. So they've got this language that's getting shorter and smaller and less expressive, drier, if you will, We did a show about Iris Murdoch's essay Against Dryness, where she talks about not really that the language is shrinking, but the range of things being expressed in language seems to be shrinking, and that's their goal here. It's just so depressing to read. It's probably not a good idea to read this while you're on a house arrest like we all are.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Scott. I recommended it.
Oh, you're a scoundrel.
Because I needed to read it. It's my fault. But I think the theme of Newspeak is the modern day acronym TLDR. Do you know what that means?
Yeah, too long, don't read.
Too long, didn't read. So you write something that is beautiful or true or good or all three, and you send it off. And the only reaction you get is TLDR, LOL.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of emoticon language is this kind of thing.
Yeah, it is that. But I think that the main goal, though, is to reduce the number of things that people can think about and reduce the number of ideas they can express. It maps directly onto political correctness.
Oh, sure, yeah. There are things that are unthinkable, things that are unsayable, that you cannot say, that there are links that you can type into some major social media networks that the link won't post because it is to a site that is forbidden. And therefore the site will be erased. And you can't talk about the site. You can't even talk about the sites in private messages, and you'll get a note from the social media site saying, if you think we are in error, contact us. You click the Contact Us button. It doesn't work. Yeah. It's like a big, I want to swear, but the big joke. People are being memory holed. This is why 1984 was so incredibly frightening to me. But it was hard to read. It was hard to read because there's people memory hold all over the place. All the cool people are gone off social media.
Right.
All the edgy people. The only people are the safe ones, the ones that are okay, and everybody's afraid to be put on the naughty list.
Yeah, a lot of people went down in the Twitter purges of 18 and 19.
What's Twitter?
Yeah, really.
I never heard of Twitter.
The book I continually was like, thinking about today as I read it. I don't know how you couldn't. Back to Winston, altering these news stories. Time and time again, I will see something in a news story that I know is bullshit. And then because I'm who I am, I follow up and I'll find the retractions. The front page story is retracted on a business card size little piece on page 62.
Mm-hmm.
People who are supposed to be responsible, we'll say journalists or writers or whatever, post things all the time that my redneck ass here in Oklahoma knows isn't true. And they must. Sometimes people make honest mistakes, but a lot of these are not honest. And we've got some Ministry of Truth stuff that happens every day. And then some things are just bald-faced lies that we're being told. Here's one. We are told, Johnny, now your local banker, he takes the dollar that you deposited in your bank account, and then he loans that to Farmer Jones so he can buy a new tractor so that you and your mommy can buy fresh milk at the grocery store. Sounds pretty good. Seems like that's how it would work.
That's a wonderful story.
But then I also will read about how the average savings rate of the American family is about $1,800 total.
That high?
It's been a while since I've looked that up, but everybody knows that most people don't have a lot of cash. Businesses also make deposits in banks, and they often will carry quite a bit more cash in their accounts because it requires more cash to run their businesses. But it don't jive, everybody. It's not what's happening. It's not what's happening.
But you have to tell the right story. Right. So there are definitely right stories to tell and wrong stories to tell. And right stories will get told and wrong stories will get pulled. Which is why I'm frustrated. George Orwell, you wrote the damn instruction manual.
Yep.
So it's a frustrating book. If you read this, if you have any kind of a sensitivity like I do, you're going to be, this is one you're going to throw across the room, not because it's bad, because it rings so true.
Orthodoxy is unconsciousness.
Yeah. They have their 2 minutes of hate. They have a manufactured enemy, Emmanuel Goldstein, And so I think is it every day? Every 2 minutes of hate?
Yeah, every day.
You just yelled things at this person?
The way I imagined it is you go into this brutalist room. Go look up brutalism, guys. It's a school of architecture. It's disgusting. You go in this concrete room and you sit in a folding chair in front of the telescreen.
Sounds like high school.
I know. And you sit in front of the telescreen in a folding chair, and everybody in your work section is in there with you because they do it in the middle of the workday. And they play pictures and videos and stuff about the Brotherhood and about this imaginary enemy, or maybe they do it about Eurasia or whoever we're at war with right now. And you're supposed to just have a cathartic, hateful freak out for 2 straight minutes. And at the end of the 2 minutes, you're supposed to just collapse, spent. You read his account of that, and there are some people that really get into it. Winston has an awareness that most people don't have, and he's able to watch others and see who's really into it and who might not really be into it. And he's pretty disgusted and scared of the people that are really into that hate. And because he's not really into it, other people who are keenly aware can tell Winston's not into it, and that's not good.
Right.
You're supposed to support our troops, Karl.
Oh, Winston is either going to be a high member of the inner party or he's going to be destroyed because he sees around the corners. And so I think towards the end of the book, they're either trying to subvert him or kill him. They can't leave him be. If you see the wires on the puppet show, you can't sit there and be at the puppet show and say, "Hey, I see the wires." You either have to be kicked out or they give you a puppet.
Right. One of my good friends, Dallas, he's told me for almost 30 years, everybody's against stealing unless they're in on it. And so they want you in on it. You know, I was thinking about the 2-minute hate. Not only is it like a brainwashing tool, it's also a pressure release valve too. I started a little bit of an S-storm on our online great books Slack, where people were talking about civil disobedience, and everybody here that listens to the show knows I love Thoreau. I said in Slack that power structures have to just absolutely love the idea that civil disobedience is more effective than violence.
You mean nonviolent protest?
Nonviolent protest.
Because
right.
civil disobedience could be violent.
Could be. You're right.
Yeah, I remember that. We've definitely been told, look, I don't want any violence. But
no.
We've been told since at least the 70s that nonviolent protest is the thing to do. It's the way to make change, to have sit-ins and to sit there quietly and not really make a stink. And your concerns will be heard and change will happen.
Yeah, you have the moral high ground. Look at Gandhi, look at Dr. King, and so on. And I understand that.
It's not even true to what they did. Now, I haven't read much Gandhi. I've read a bit of King. The point is to piss everybody off. The point is to inconvenience. The point is it's not really nonviolent when you're laying down and stopping traffic.
Right.
You are ceasing the wheels of the machine.
Is that kind of nonviolent protest about, it's about imbalance of weapons technology. Like if you can't shoot it out.
Yeah. But it's definitely, you have to cause trouble or you don't get anything. But it being promoted as, if you have your 2 minutes of hate and then you go back about your business, you're tame.
Right. And so I was thinking about our nonviolent protest in terms of the 2-minute hate. People go to the main mall and they march and they raise hell for a weekend and they go home and they feel all right about it. And then nothing happens. They go occupy Wall Street for a couple of weeks or a number of weeks or whatever. And then who cares? And they still do the big bank buyouts and all that stuff and nothing happens. But it lets the pressure off. It lets people feel like they did something and lets them feel like they have agency. And I think that stuff maps directly onto the 2-minute hate. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
I'll probably get hate mail about that. They would rather you had the 2 minutes hate, or they'd rather you did the nonviolent protest than string people up from the lampposts like they did in the French Revolution.
Sure. Yeah. Guys, if you're going to send us hate mail, at least make it interesting.
Yeah. Don't give me some boring stuff about Gandhi's moral high ground. Don't do me that.
Well, but I see the thing is, I don't think Gandhi and Martin Luther King were as tame as they're presented to us.
Right.
They weren't. They were causing massive disruptions. And if they hadn't caused massive disruption, they were doing it, like you say, the asymmetry of the means of doing it. The goal in this book, behind the 2-minute hate, behind the screens everywhere, behind Newspeak, is to remove the tools of even thinking opposing. So there's a line where Winston's sitting there writing, and he doesn't even know what to write. And he just writes, down with Big Brother on his page. That's going to be one of the crimes that gets him into trouble later. Because, of course, it's witnessed, because everything you do is witnessed. But he says, this is on page 20 in my edition. Let's see. So always the eyes watching you and the voice enveloping you, asleep or awake, working or eating, indoors or out of doors, in the bath or in bed, no escape. Nothing was your own except the few cubic centimeters inside your skull. Well, that's the thought, that the only place that he has for freedom is inside his skull, inside the mind. I suppose Orwell's being a materialist here. Wherever the mind is, that's the only place that you have any freedom.
You're such a geek. Yeah, your inner life, whatever that is the only thing you've got. And I think that's all you ever have, actually. And then Newspeak is designed to take that away.
Mm-hmm. So I think this is connected. So in this world, Winston has a love affair, a brief, wonderful love affair with Julia, where they'll go meet places and do the things that ladies and gentlemen do with each other. This is a revolutionary act. You're not supposed to do this. You're not supposed to have erotic love. And I wonder if the reason for that is that that's connected to the inner life. There was something about this in the ancient Greeks. Love causes revolutions. Or can cause revolutions, because you start to think that this person I love, or these people I love, but usually it's the person, is more important than the state. Julia is more important to him than Big Brother, than the state. His description of his wife, he has a wife. There's no passion, there's no love, there's no eros at all. It's doing your duty for the state. Well, but with Julia, it's an act. It's his. At
first, he hated Julia. She's much younger than him. He's in his early 40s, and she's probably in her late 20s. And she was clearly a member of the Junior Anti-Sex League, because the sash of the Junior Anti-Sex League was wound several times round the waist of her overalls, just tightly enough to bring out the shapeliness of her hips.
She's wearing the Anti-Sex League sash in a provocative manner. Yeah. She might be a Fed, In a state like this, you always are suspicious that somebody else is going to inform on you.
Big Brother's watching you.
Yeah, Big Brother, who might not really exist. Or it might be Emmanuel Goldstein.
Everybody's an informant. Everyone's children are just terrors in this book. The parents aren't really able to raise the children. They just have them in the evenings and kind of feed them. And then they're members of all these little youth groups, the spies, the Junior Anti-Sex League, whatever. People with children, they almost are resigned to the fact at some point their children are going to turn them in for some crime.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll be disappeared. The children are absolute terrors and are no end of trouble for the parents.
They're raised by Big Brother. They're not raised by you.
And that's the way they are now, right? You send them to PS 149 for X number of hours a day. And
from age 6 to age 18.
Yeah. If you really give them a head start, you can send them to pre-K, and then you have them after school, and then you spend time yelling at them to get them to do the homework they assigned you at school, and then sleeping.
Mm-hmm. So who raised your kid?
Yeah, why are these kids... And boy, I've had so much trouble with Johnny. We hadn't raised him.
You don't even know him. Yeah, I want to go back to the sex thing.
Me too.
This is like Book 5 of the Republic. Socrates, you talked about sex earlier. Let's go back to that. So you have the Junior Anti-Sex League. They're trying to make romantic love that is actually between two people be forbidden, be icky. In Brave New World, they did a similar thing where, all the birth happens in the lab. And yet, Big Brother is a pornographer.
Well, they only provide the porn to the proles. They only provide it to the proles. So there's three kinds of people, I think. There's the inner party, and that sounds just like you think it would. Not very many people in the inner party. He doesn't say how many, but I don't know. Maybe it's 1%. I don't know. The 1%. The inner party. And then there's the outer party, and Winston's in the outer party. And those are people that do work for the government, and they're kind of in on it, but they don't get the good coffee and the good apartment and all that.
Would you join the inner party for the sake of good coffee?
No. And then there are the proles, the proletariat proles, and they live outside of all of that. They might be street sweepers. They might be the trash man. It might be a butcher. I mean, it's a caste system. They do the dirty jobs. A lot of nations that have existed over our globe, there's been a caste system where lower caste people do things that were health-wise dangerous. So if you were upper caste, you didn't hang around with the lower caste people because they handled things like animals and waste. So the proles are kind of like that. But they've got a lot more freedom than anybody else does.
Just because nobody cares about them.
Because nobody cares about them.
Which is a way to get freedom, is to be inconsequential, to be a slacker.
Are they slackers?
Well, I don't know. I'm wondering, if you were living in this kind of world, Winston is screwed because he's in the outer party. If he were a prole, remember that there's the description of the woman. There's a woman who,
I love it.
This prole woman who maybe had 10 kids, and she was large at present, and maybe she's in her mid-40s or something. And Winston turns to Julia and says she's beautiful. And Julia's like, well, her backside's about 1 meter wide. Well, this is how her beauty is today.
Yeah. Can I read that chunk? He said, it's on page 171 of the little paperback. It says, she had had her momentary flowering, a year perhaps, of wild rose beauty, and then she had suddenly swollen like a fertilized fruit and grown hard and red and coarse. And then her life had been laundering, scrubbing, darning, cooking, sweeping, polishing, mending, scrubbing, laundering. First for children, then for grandchildren, over 30 unbroken years. And at the end of it, she was still singing.
Mm-hmm. That would have been the way to go. She's got more of a life than, what's his name? O'Brien?
O'Brien, yeah.
The people in charge. It's very frustrating. So there are movers and shakers in the world. You know who they are, that jet around the world and go to conferences and impose burdens upon us and
sneer
at us, fly over country, And you think, why are they doing it? What is the motive? You're 78 years old. Why don't you leave the Senate and go hang out with for example, go hang out with your grandkids?
Right.
I actually got to see Sumner Redstone give a talk, and they wheeled him up on stage. And I'm just looking up. He's 96 years old. He's born in 1923. This was probably in 2000 that I got to see him. So 77 years old, maybe. He's already a bit like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons. And they got him up on the stage and he gave this talk. And owner of Viacom, founder of Viacom, I don't know. He was a billionaire. And he got up there, and I remember he said, I don't have it word for word, but this is the gist. He said, you may think that things like family and friends and all of that other stuff are the best, but really what's the best is the deal. What? Are you kidding me? So in the end of the book, we've teased this a bit. The motive for power is simply power. Why would people do this? Redstone is behind MTV.
Because, he's passionate about music,
No, because it makes a lot of money destroying lives. Did I say that out loud?
I like it.
Well, why did you do it, It's frustrating to me. Power becomes an end in itself, which is the motive for the party in Orwell. He's not making this stuff up. This is the way some of these people think. They have more than they'll ever need in terms of wealth.
On one of the other podcasts I'm on, I have deuced on Warren Buffett a couple of times on there. Like, what is he doing? He's pushing 90 years old. Like, why isn't he trying to write the great American novel, taking his grandkids fishing? Like, what is he doing? He's broken at base because there's not enough in the world to fill the hole in his soul.
Now, I don't know enough about Buffett. Redstone, I know some of the companies that he has, and I don't think much of him. If you were 90 and you're trading and you're just doing what you've always done and it's not nefarious or anything, I don't see too much problem with that.
I do. At some point, where it's on page 37, they say that marriage and the care of a family are incompatible with 24-hour-a-day devotion to duty to the state in this example.
Mm-hmm.
And Buffett, by the way, he plays this oh shucks country lawyer, Will Rogers, kindly uncle bullshit, Meanwhile, he's got this weird open marriage with his wife. Like, she lives in California and he lives in Nebraska, and he hasn't moved into that last stage of life. I mean, I'm not privy to his private life, but he hasn't moved into that, at least publicly, moved into that last stage of life where you're a grandparent. I don't understand. Now, he might say, he has supposedly groomed a successor there at Berkshire Hathaway. Maybe he sees that as him, grooming that person and helping them and mentoring them. Maybe he sees that as the thing. But, I had a business that made some money, not Buffett money, but I made enough and I sold that son of a bitch in 2018. And I said, I'm going to go do things that are higher and more important for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, but the thing is, you think that there are things higher and more important.
Right.
So your vision of happiness, I would say your understanding, I don't use the vision word, your understanding of happiness is, I think, deeper than a lot of people's who, once you got, what are you going to do? Make a ton of money, die richer than everybody else?
Yeah, once you've got enough.
What's the point? I got a few kids. That's the whole point for me. We were sitting watching a movie last night, doing stupid things, saying silly jokes to each other. This is it, right? Power for its own sake, I don't understand, but there are people who do it.
Mm-hmm.
That you think, you're sick, you're dying, why are you still pushing this at the end of your life? Because you don't have anything else. Yeah. That woman with the grandkids in the story, she's had it. She is much more of a real human being than Winston is, than O'Brien is, than Julia is. Winston and Julia are trying.
I read that little section there about her momentary flowering and then the laundry and so on. And I know that a lot of people read that same paragraph there and thought, God, that sounds awful. But what's the flip of that? If you don't do that, what is it you're going to be doing? You're pushing the TPS report. You're going to your performance review. Who do you want to work for? Your posterity or Mr. Jenkins? What are you doing? But the state in 1984 understands completely that family gets in the way of 24-hour devotion to duty. And our duty up until the great pandemic of 2020 has been to consume, I think. Since probably 1963, let's say. It's been to consume.
Well, families are problematic there's that word again.
Oh my God.
Problematic. They are a problem to the control. Yep. Because you're going to love the people in your family. And you're going to defend your family. If you're immersed in family life, that's what it means. That's what the job of a father is, as I perceive it, is to defend them.
Mm-hmm. From manifold danger.
Yeah, it's not to be a useful gear in the cog of the state.
Yep.
So, got to wipe it out, got to get rid of it, which they do in 1984.
And they do, and they replace it with it's almost pure economic calculus. Day and night, the telescreens bruised your ears with statistics proving that people today had more food, more clothes, better houses, better recreations, that they lived longer, worked shorter hours, were bigger, healthier, stronger, happier, more intelligent, better educated than the people of 50 years ago. They tell me the same shit every day. GDP went up, life expectancies, blah, 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 blah. I'm not sure about the life expectancy thing, by the way, Karl. I think fewer people die at 18 in car wrecks, bar brawls, infant mortality is probably down, but I don't think old people are getting much older. So statistically, the life expectancies look a little better, perhaps, but I'm not sure that that's true. And even if it is, I don't care. I'm not interested in 18 months in Evergreen Terrace or whatever the hell it's going to be, But we're told that stuff all the time. But, go back and look at some pictures of people in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Is it better?
Well, it's quality of life versus quantity of life. Quality is a hard thing to grasp, I suppose, but I keep harping on this. So the three transcendentals that the medievals came up with, this is truth, beauty, and goodness. I think beauty might be the most important of those.
You mean the Dark Ages? People from the Dark Ages didn't come up with anything. They pooped and then they sat in it.
That's not true.
Oh, I saw Monty Python.
First, it's not true. And second, there's more to life than plumbing. Although it is an important part of life, there's more to life than that. So it's three aspects of being. Okay? Anything that is both is true and is good and is beautiful. It's also one. I think there's a couple other more doubtful transcendentals. But those are like first principles. That's why you have a mind. You know, what do you have a mind for? The dog doesn't have one. I'm sorry, your dog doesn't have a mind. I'll go out. I'm going to say that. I think it might have been a big mistake when Odysseus named his dog. I mean, dogs are fine. They're fun, but
they have half a soul.
Yeah, you've got to think about what you're going to do. You can think about yourself. Well, why can you think about yourself? You could have usefully. Kant has a wonderful line. He talks about. Well, he's got some problems, but if the purpose of the mind was to give you pleasure, he uses the word happiness. That's where I think he gets it wrong. Happiness isn't the same thing as pleasure. But he says, if the mind's purpose was to give you pleasure, then nature has come across a most disadvantageous arrangement because the mind doesn't give you pleasure. A dog is much happier in that sense than you are and never has to worry about its own existence. The plants, the trees, the squirrels, they don't have consciousness like we do. As far as we know, I'm pretty sure they don't. They don't have any doubt. They don't have any worry. They don't have any love, not in the way we do. They have mating urges. They don't have love. They don't have ideals. So, you who have a mind, you want to think, what's the point of a mind? Is it merely existence? I don't think so. I think it's a wonderful existence. Right. And so when you think about the party in 1984, or parties, political parties, wherever they are, because these things happen in the real world, if you take the mind that is not directed towards truth, beauty, and goodness, what's left? Power?
Your unit of production.
Or the will to power.
Or the will to power. That's it. So Winston doesn't have the will to power. They sussed this out from him when he was in school as a little boy, and he was put in the outer party as a result.
Yeah.
They figure out who you are pretty early. He was awful to his mother. He has recollections of being awful to his mother, as all little kids are in these stories, in this story. And he was singled out as not quite fit a long, long time ago.
Unsuitable.
Yeah. The whole world here, he's a small man. He's smallish, frail. Page 2, it says that. The world that they live in is just shabby, just worn out. He says the reality was decaying, dingy cities where underfed people shuffled to and fro in leaky shoes and patched up 19th century houses. So the decay around all of these people is evidence that something had been fresh at some point. You look at a decaying 19th century house, you're like, well, hell, in the 19th century, it had to have been new.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not aware of it. But, I drive around Tulsa, Oklahoma here. Our roads are just awful. I got a late model Honda automobile my wife drives. I've had it aligned twice because the roads just beat the suspension out from under the car. Our infrastructure in this country is decaying.
But we've got marvelous diversions in social media and online videos.
Yep. But that decay is evidence that it once was fresh.
Yeah.
What's going on? I don't know. But it's right in front of him, and he can't even tell. And he doesn't have his house is shabby and shitty and dusty and it's not clean. And he doesn't, at no point does he say to himself that he's going to sweep the floor, straighten that picture frame. He never lifts a finger to do one thing to make his material condition better.
It's not one of his possibilities of action, which
He can't do it.
It's one of the points of Newspeak of control of the information. We can close off avenues of behavior to you. So that thing about only that few cubic centimeters of your brain is free, the rest of the book makes the point that no, it's not. It's not really free. And this is where the book gets really scary. And Gabriel Marcel talked about this, Man Against Mass Society, that the techniques of dehumanization that the 20th century came up with is to get inside your mind. Where is that space that you can be yourself? If the past is constructed, if everything you see is constructed, to go back to a book that this is very similar to, except like its inverse reflection, go back to the Republic. There you are in the cave. How do you even know you're in the cave?
Can't tell.
So I was thinking, I mean, we've been going along a while in this book already. I don't like it. I don't like the ideas in it. And I start thinking of self-defense. How do you make this sort of thing impossible? What I think does it, I'm thinking about Solzhenitsyn walking around, sending his manuscript around on paper for people that would have to turn it around in 24 hours. You have to have a diversity of thought.
I hadn't thought about that 24-hour deal. Yeah, you have to have a diversity of thought. You need your own copy of your books. You need to be thinking.
Many sources for the culture. You can't have one.
Winston and Julia, somehow, she falls in the hallway in front of him. And he helps her up. And she scurries away. And she'd pressed a piece of paper into his palm, and it says, "I love you." He doesn't know what to do. But by and by, they piece it all together and come up with a rendezvous, and they go out in the country, and they have a rendezvous, and they are adults out there. And then they find other ways to rendezvous. And Winston lets a little room above a shop where he bought a journal a long time ago. And by, a guy named O'Brien, who had a knowing look in his eye all along, who Winston thought might be on his team, says, "Hey, come by I live over here. I've got a book. I've got a new edition of the Newspeak dictionary. You might like to look at it. Here's my address. Come by sometime." And they go by, come to find out O'Brien is a member of the Brotherhood. And he says, "Look, we've got a book. Emmanuel Goldstein wrote this book, and it tells you all about us. Well, we're going to get it to you, and here's how we're going to do it." They come up with a way to do it. All spy stuff, cloak and dagger shit. So he gets this book, and Winston starts reading the book. And he can only have it for 48 hours. It's right out of Solzhenitsyn. It's the same thing, but this predates Solzhenitsyn. And he starts reading the book. And Karl, do you think that the book was Orwell's observations of like political theory and because he has like a theory of war in there. He talks about war. He talks about the purposes of war, what technology had done to war. He had talked about the wars at this point were created to destroy material wealth because material wealth creates intelligence. Did you see that stuff?
I did.
I thought it was, we'll never know, or maybe some scholar out there would tell us, but it seemed like Orwell cut a hole in the book and let us look into his mind in that subversive book that Emmanuel Goldstein supposedly wrote. What do you think?
Do I think it was Orwell? Yeah, I do. And I know people are going to say, well, actually, Orwell was a socialist. Well, okay, if he wasn't this kind of socialist.
No.
And I didn't really care, I did not go look up his biography. I generally don't do that for these books because the books are what he left us.
Right. My grandparents on my mother's side and my great-grandparents and such on my mother's side, I was telling you and Michelle Hawkins this earlier today, were socialists. And I had one grandfather on my mother's side, great-grandfather on my mother's side, who was, I believe, a Communist Party member in the 30s in Oklahoma. I never got to talk to that guy. But I did talk to some of these socialist relatives of mine who would have been contemporaries with Orwell. Of course, he's in England and they're over here in Oklahoma. But they're not the kind of socialists you're thinking about. They're pro-union people. They got some distributist in them a little bit. They are not 2020 socialists. So I don't know what Orwell was necessarily. But he has an interesting idea about material wealth creating intelligence. He just it's stated in the Goldstein book, pretty much. He says the material wealth might be used to make the masses too comfortable and hence in the long run too intelligent. So comfort. It's leisure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Leisure is where that stuff comes from. He writes later, at the same time, the consciousness of being at war and therefore in danger makes the handing over of all power to a small caste seem natural, unavoidable condition of survival. And I wrote next to it, COVID. I mean, just on and on and on. Just wonderful observations in here.
The perpetual crisis. Today it's one thing. Maybe sometimes it's an actual crisis, but
they happen.
There's always a crisis. There's always a reason to be compliant. What, do you want people to die? Don't you know there's a crisis going on?
Right. Don't you care about old people? The COVID will kill them. Yeah, I do. But there's more calculus than that. Look, we're constant crisis. War on poverty, war on drugs. Now we have the unseen enemy. Did you see that in the tweet?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this stuff maps directly on. And then he talks about how there were atomics used in the last big war. Weapons had gotten pretty good. Ours used to be pretty good. I don't know if they still are. He says, the war, therefore, if we judge it by standards of previous wars, is merely an imposture. Like our wars now do seem sort of half-assed, don't they?
Well, not to the people that fight them, of which I know a few. But
well, I get it. If you're a dude on the ground in platoon A or whatever, it's the real deal. But it's a matter of scale and intent, though, right? Where we're not talking about assailing Fortress Europe.
There never seems to be an end. We're still at war with North Korea.
Right. We've always been at war with North Korea.
Right. Until we're at war with somebody else. So there are these three nations. There's Oceania, East Asia, and Eurasia. And you're always at war, and you're at war with one or the other. But if you're at war with the other one, you've always been at war with it.
Yeah, because Winston and his department at the Ministry of Truth will change all of the history books. And so Winston, in his short life, had seen the war with East Asia and Eurasia come and go each about 4 different times, I think, if I counted correctly. Mm-hmm. And he had a vague memory of it, but he didn't trust his own memory.
No. Well, and how can you trust your memory if all of the newspapers say something different? If you go back, I was thinking of, I know this one will get you riled up. I was thinking of the war between the states in these United States, okay? Which is a complicated and messy and sloppy and horrible thing. There's been some Ministry of Truth stuff done on that. There are stories that are accepted on that. Let's say you went and you scrubbed everything that Lincoln said and made him be a pure anti-slavery crusader from start to finish. And you reworked the entire war so that it became noble Northmen deciding that slavery was wrong and going to war against evil Southmen. And you scrubbed every other motive from all the historical record. And you made it a tame war that fit your narrative. That would be what Ministry of Truth does.
Yep.
Taking the reality, whatever the reality was, but who knows? You're all people who are in it are dead.
Right.
You can make the reality be whatever you want.
Or, since we don't live in Oceania and we don't live at Airstrip 1, we can go read a whole bunch of different sources.
Right.
And start to reconstruct what happened and get maybe a little closer to the thing.
Mm-hmm. I can go to Cuba, Missouri, and go to their library and find out newspapers that they've got preserved from whenever. That's why I'm a distributivist on information. Mm-hmm. There needs to be a lot of sources and a lot of places where it's kept so that you can't have a Ministry of Truth.
Paper and microfilm.
Yeah, things won't get entirely horrible as long as there's not a Ministry of Truth.
But if Amazon is your primary source and 99% of books, particularly new books, are digital.
And most things are hosted on Amazon servers.
Yeah, you have no idea what's going on if that's the case. The war, therefore, if we judge it by standards of previous wars, is merely an imposture, he says in that Goldstein book. for the people, so there's some contested territories between these three giant nation states, and it's very real for the people that live in the contested territories. But no matter who's fighting who, here comes the new boss, same as the old boss for them.
Mm-hmm.
They can't tell what color the bombs are. They just don't care. It's real for them. Because war is so high stakes in the world of 1984, it's actually very limited in scope. And he talks about bombs falling on London from time to time. But every time I read about a bomb that was falling near Winston in his home, I thought, Big Brother's probably dropping that damn bomb. I mean, yeah, it doesn't make any sense that there's a bomb there. The wars are an imposture. And I wrote here in the margin, this will get me hate mail too. At the end of World War II, Patton knew this as well. He's like, if we care about evil and if we care about people, we don't stop in Berlin and we go all the way to Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
And he died in a car wreck a few months later. Died.
I thought he fell off a horse, didn't he?
No, he was in
a car
wreck, yeah. I think they killed him. I'll say it. He's like, let's go to Berlin. I didn't do it. Should have.
Or go to Moscow. Let's go to Moscow.
I'm sorry, I'm going to Moscow. He said, let's not stop. So Germany storms Poland. Churchill's incensed. And the West is incensed. Okay. Declare war, yada, yada, yada. Go to Yalta. Give Poland to the Russians.
Yep.
What?
England's always been at war with Eurasia.
But to Poland, here comes the new boss, same as the old boss. They're in the hinterlands like the people that are talked about in this book here. They're just storm-tossed, and everybody else is playing this weird game of Risk.
If you read original sources on World War II, you start to get real upset.
Yeah.
You're like, wait, I thought they were good guys.
Right.
Maybe they were real bad guys and not quite as bad guys.
I know stuff's complex, and I've got hindsight, but man, if you care about Poland, then you care about Poland. And you remember, Churchill's the guy that does the Iron Curtain speech. He knows what those people are.
We have World War II days out by us every summer. Who knows about this summer? And, well, there are not too many veterans of that one left. But they'll show up, and we've got some singers that do Andrews Sisters songs. I love the Andrews Sisters. I got a crush on them. I think they're all dead, too, but it doesn't matter to me. My heart doesn't care.
They'll always live for us, Karl.
And they have a lot of war reenactors, which is a real interesting thing for people to do. They make their own costumes. They go out, pretend to be German soldiers. But we've got a whole bunch because we've got a bunch of Ukrainians and Polish out here. So we have a Ukrainian regiment.
That's crazy. I like that.
And then a Polish regiment. And they take this one valley in the big park where it is, and they set up the Polish camp, and you can see, and they put up these placards of the heroic and tragic things that happened to Poland in World War II. And you just read that, and it's like, nobody knows any of this stuff. But, that goes back to the big theme here. There's no memory of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the job of the reenactors is to propagate the memory of things that would fade away. No one would ever know what happened in any of these situations unless somebody tells you and somebody preserves it.
In this Goldstein book, it's a history of the last half of the 20th century. I think that Orwell was writing as a prediction, and I come to find out he's right on. He says that the new leadership class, as compared with their opposite numbers in past ages, were less avaricious, less tempted by luxury, hungrier for pure power, and above all, more conscious of what they were doing and more intent on crushing opposition. The last difference was cardinal. By comparison with that existing today, all the tyrannies of the past were half-hearted and inefficient. I'm making a little jump. The new aristocracy was made up for the most part of bureaucrats, scientists, technicians, trade union organizers, publicity experts, sociologists, teachers, journalists, and professional politicians. So mad. Karl, when I was in school, they've rewritten the history books, by the way. That when you get the book, the history book, and it says 6th edition.
Yeah, why do you need 6 editions?
The history hasn't fucking changed. Why do you need that? No, that's what that means, guys. You might put out an edition if you had a bunch of typos, But you can post a page of errata in the back and we'll know. But when I was a kid, you'd go to school in American history, they would teach you about the robber barons, the monopolists, J.D. Rockefeller and John Pierpont Morgan and Carnegie and the Standard Oil Trust and U.S. Steel and so on, and how that had to be broken up. And then we had the Taft-Hartley Act and trust busting, and Roosevelt was a trust buster, and we had all the Thomas Nash cartoons that were in the textbook, and we saw all about how bad these people were and how the railroad trusts and the oil trusts were crushing, banking trusts were crushing the country. And they did away with that. The progressives in the early 20th century did away with that. It ushered in an era of new prosperity that we coasted right on through to, I don't know, I was in the fourth grade apparently. But now we don't say shit about Bezos or Gates or any of these guys. We just keep licking their shoes. They're not fat cats. They're not monopolists. The whole vocabulary of that stuff that I read about in books when I was a kid is gone.
No, that never happened.
Right. So you got
gone.
You got this dork who couldn't get a date, can barely communicate, who stole some software, and whose mom got him an appointment with IBM and got him a job, helped him get a contract so that he could form what became the giant Microsoft, telling us about our health care. And everybody goes, yeah, that's fine. That's okay. What is happening?
Are we supposed to not like the monopolist?
Well, that's what I was taught in the second edition of the Harcourt Brace Johanovich, whatever book I had.
But now the monopolist is a good guy.
Yeah, now they're technocrats who are smarter than us.
Oh, yes. They're Silicon Valley elite.
Right. And they're smarter than us, and their wealth is evidence of that superior intellect. And Bill Gates says, your body, my choice. We're coming up with a vaccine. You're going to take it. It's utterly crazy. Have you seen any public pushback about any of this stuff?
Public? What does that mean? You might have to go to some less savory places.
Come over to my house.
Yeah, you got to meet behind the chevron and talk a little treason, as they say in Ireland.
Chevron. Are you talking about the gas station?
Yeah.
We would say meet behind the 7-Eleven. Isn't that funny? Yeah, history has been rewritten around here. But he's got this book, and he reads the book. Come to find out, O'Brien is a state operative. He's inter-party. O'Brien himself wrote the book. He says he wrote the book, or at least had a hand in it. And then the torture begins, and they undertake to break Winston. And they have a very specific definition of just how broken he needs to be in order for him to live.
Well, no, they're going to kill him, but he needs to admit that he was wrong.
Not just admit that he was wrong. He needs to disavow every single thing he cares for.
Right. That otherwise you're allowing somebody to have victory over the party, and that
False
cannot
gods.
happen. So there's a passage I want to read a little bit of. This is 206 in my digital edition. Sorry. O'Brien, who has tortured him, he's asking, tell me why we cling to power. What is our motive? Why should we want power? Go on, speak. And Winston says, you are ruling over us for our own good, he said feebly. You believe that human beings are not fit to govern themselves, and therefore... And then O'Brien turns up the painometer, or the pain machine. He's got, like, you know, in Princess Bride, he's got one of those machines. That was stupid, Winston, stupid. You should know better than to say a thing like that. Now, I will tell you the answer to my question. It is this. The party seeks power entirely for its own sake. We're not interested in the good of others. We're interested solely in power. Not wealth or luxury or long life or happiness. Only power, pure power. A little bit later in that paragraph, power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. The object of persecution is persecution. The object of torture is torture. The object of power is power. Yikes. Is this a fairy tale? Does this not exist? What do you think, dear listener? Do I have my tinfoil hat on too tight? And, everyone's going to listen to this. And in America, we have two dominant political parties.
What?
Yes, in theory. And you're going to listen to this, and you're going to listen to it, and you're going to say, yeah. And you know who the party is? They're the party I don't like. No. Think of what Orwell's doing here. There's Big Brother, and there's Goldstein. But Goldstein is controlled opposition. There is no brotherhood. It's a safety valve. It's like the 2 minutes of hate. There's the power, and then there's the not power. There's one source of power. This is a monarchy. This is a monotheism.
Yep.
So don't be so sure there's two parties. Maybe there's not. And don't be too quick to read this on a surface level and say, yeah, those guys I hate, they're the bad guys in the book. Do a little critical distance and think about it and say, well, if what Orwell's talking about, is it true? Is he right about it? Does it matter? And if it's true, where is it? And then you might think, if I don't like this and it's true, how might I defend against it? What actions can I take to keep myself and my loved ones free and happy in the full sense of happiness?
Oh, Karl.
Turn off the screen while you still can.
There's no happy ending in this book.
No, not in this book. That lady that had all the kids, she's the happiest person in the book.
Yep.
He betrays everybody.
This show's all about spoilers, right? Every time, every week. Julia and Winston betray each other. Not only betray each other, wish harm on the others that they might not be harmed more.
Yeah.
It's really awful. But, we can only take so much.
After you read this and you think about the experience of Winston and Julia, you can go back in time and listen to the Solzhenitsyn one again, or go read that book.
Yep.
And Solzhenitsyn is self-reflective enough. And he's like, no, you should have resisted the moment they arrested you. You shouldn't have done any of this. But then again, it hurts. He's like, how could you resist? Because he'll list all the tortures, and who could blame you if you didn't?
Yep.
But on the other hand, you should have. Solzhenitsyn went through it. Orwell didn't.
Orwell saw some stuff. He's got an essay on hanging. He was there during the Spanish Civil War, saw some crazy stuff. Orwell had been around and had seen some things. 172, Karl. The birds sang, the proles sang. The party did not sing. All around the world, in London and New York, in Africa and Brazil, and in the mysterious forbidden lands beyond the frontiers, in the streets of Paris and Berlin, in the villages of the endless Russian plain, in the bazaars of China and Japan, everywhere stood the same solid, unconquerable figure, made monstrous by work and childbearing, toiling from birth to death and still singing. Out of those mighty loins, a race of conscious beings must one day come. You were the dead. Theirs was the future.
Gosh, that's a pretty good...
The future belongs to the people that show up.
Yeah, that's a pretty good bit of prose right there.
But you could share in that future if you kept alive the mind as they kept alive the body, and passed on the secret doctrine that 2 + 2 make 4.
Yeah. This, I remember, you're going to think I'm a real nerd, more than you think I am already.
Inconceivable.
There is a Star Trek The Next Generation episode.
Oh, yeah, you did it.
Where Picard is captured by somebody and is interrogated. And I hadn't read this book by then. I read Brave New World when I was a kid, but I didn't read 1984. He's being tortured, and there's 2 lights in front of him. And the guy who's torturing him will say, how many lights are there? And he would say, there's 2, and he'd get tortured more. They want him to say 3. I read this, like, there's the Star Trek episode. It's getting you to say things are true that are not true. Once that happens, then it's free for all, fair game. You can make reality be what you want. You can fly, because if I think I'm flying and you think I'm flying, and there's nobody who thinks I'm not flying, even if my butt's planted on this chair, I'm flying.
O'Brien goes beyond getting him to say that 2 + 2 = 5. That's one of the big tests. O'Brien has to believe that he believes it. Because pretty early on in the torture, Winston says, 5, damn it. He says, no, you don't really believe it. There's those laws of thought. They've got to break the bedrock of your rationality for them to win. And yeah, that's the project of postmodernism. What are we going to read next, Karl?
Oh, gosh, it's got to be something lighter. We were chatting. We're going to do
Starship Troopers.
Starship Troopers. A little bit lighter. And it's not a light book. It's not super happy, but it's like cupcakes next to 1984.
1984 is a bummer.
I'm sorry. You probably want to have read it, but you're not going to want to read it. I'm sorry, dear listener. Starship Troopers is a lot of fun. It is also thought-provoking. It has lots of interesting things to say about the nature of government and war and the connections between them. Yeah, it's real good. The movie is absolutely the opposite of the book. On purpose.
I believe that.
The movie's kind of funny, but it's campy, but it's made by people who hated what Heinlein was saying and made the movie say the complete opposite. If Peter Jackson hated Tolkien and made Lord of the Rings, you know, that would be similar.
Yeah, we're going to have to, spoilers about our show. We're going to have to talk about authorial intent and what did he, and try to figure out what Heinlein believed. I don't know if that's a good exercise or not.
I don't know, but look, hey, it's got Space Marines.
Yeah.
What more do I need to say?
It's kind of like Full Metal Jacket. There's a basic training episode, and then there's kind of a semi-clean break, and then it's wartime. And I've enjoyed it so much. I've read about 60% of it so far, and it'll be good. And Karl and I are going to get our heads together and work on a little reading list, so give everybody a longer heads up on what we're going to be reading, so you can kind of pick and choose maybe on to read along with us, because you'll see a little farther ahead of time. Then you'll also get to see how miserable our schedule is. That's the real reason for publishing that, because I want you to weep openly when you see that schedule. Gosh, what else? Okay, I know what. Go subscribe to the Music and Ideas podcast with Karl and Michelle and myself. That's a pretty good show. It only comes out every other week, so we're not going to jam up your feed too bad. Go get on that thing, and then also go leave us some reviews for that one if you're listening to that show, and for this one, go leave them wherever you listen, wherever that's, whether that's Google Play or Stitcher or whatever the heck. Go leave us a review. That helps, and then send it to somebody else. And then don't forget, we'll be doing some free sessions at onlinegreatbooks.com/plague. So if you want to get a little, you know, we're like drug dealers. The first hit's free. If you want to get a little taste, you can go there and sign up, and it's on us. It's not really about being a drug dealer. It's about everybody's stuck at home and
we're not selling Soma.
Miserable. Should we? I want the Soma concession. How do you get that?
If you're not already in it, it's too late.
Okay. Oh my goodness. I'm bummed out. I guess I'm going to go draw a warm bath and just cut my wrist.
No, don't do that. How about you think about some beautiful things?
Jennifer Grey pre-nose job.
I was thinking your lovely family.
Oh, okay. That's all right too. We made butter the other day.
Yeah, I saw that on the Instagram, one of them social media things.
Pretty good. It's a little gamey, which ain't bad. It's between the sort of homogenized butter product that you get at the store and brie.
That sounds delicious.
Yeah, it's good. But if you butter up with that thinking you're just going to get the kind of greasy salt thing that you get from the butter you get down at the A&P store, it's different. But it's very tasty. Anyway, go make some butter. Go bake something up. Go read one of these books. I don't know. Should they go read 1984, Karl?
They should have read it. I don't know how you get to the have read state without reading it. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's a reach. I don't know either. That's all right. Go knock that thing out, and then join us next week for Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers. It's going to be fun. Talk to you guys soon.